Hi! I've decided to make some videos in which I answer a number of questions that I'm frequently being asked during my workshops and lectures. So in this video, I will talk about the evidence base for acceptance and commitment therapy and evidence base for psychological treatments more generally. The shortest answer is ACT is a therapy specifically designed for targeting experiential avoidance. And experiential avoidance is one of the best known contributors to psychopathology. Experiential avoidance is not the only one. Other well-known contributors are, for example, repetitive negative thinking and self-focused attention. You can find a short overview of transdiagnostic processes in my article. I will talk more about experiential avoidance in a separate video, but here I would say that although experiential avoidance accounts for a significant amount of mental health problems, its role in maintaining psychopathology can't be evaluated on a general basis. It varies from person to person, from diagnosis to diagnosis, and depends on various circumstances. Well, for me these two words exclude each other. Either something is a therapy, which means it has scientific foundations, or something is an alternative to a therapy, which means it lacks scientific foundations. So, either a therapy or an alternative. ACT is without any doubt a therapy, or a mainstream therapy if you prefer, with solid scientific foundations. It's actually a threefold question, so let's look at three types of evidence. Firstly, when we talk about evidence-based treatment, we talk about the empirical status of their theoretical underpinnings. And Bruce Van Pelt proposed the term bona fide therapies, which means therapies that are therapeutically intended, have a clear rationale, and are guided by a coherent theoretical structure based on empirical research. Therapeutically intended means here that it's not enough to get better as a result of something, to call it a therapy. A depressed person may, for example, become less depressed from attending dancing lessons, but they can't be called therapy because they are not intended to have such an effect. So let us look at the criteria once more. Therapeutically intended, have a clear rationale, guided by a coherent theoretical structure, which is based on empirical research. ACT meets all that criteria. It has a solid empirical basis rooted directly in experimental psychology and in empirical behavioral science. It has also a clear model of psychopathology with practical implications for clinicians. So we can conclude that ACT is a bona fide therapy. The second type of evidence for any treatment is evidence for its clinical effectiveness, provided by outcome studies. In practice, the term evidence-based treatment is usually used in a very reduced sense and refers only to clinical outcome studies. That's a great paradox. In fact, the majority of studies have poor quality, and this is actually the weakest part of psychotherapy research. A recent umbrella review, for example, found that only 7% of psychotherapeutic meta-analysis met methodological criteria necessary for providing evidence for their conclusions. There is no such thing as evidence-based treatment in general. They are like aspirin, may work for some problems, but not necessarily for others. So we must always look at outcome data for a specific diagnosis, specific problem, or for a precisely defined population. There are currently about 450 randomized controlled trials on ACT, if I remember correctly. And you have to look in those studies to check out effectiveness for whatever you're interested in or whatever is relevant for you. My advice here is one solid study is worth more than 100 of poorly designed trials. So when you read articles, look for some important quality markers like study power, which depends on the number of participants. Underpowered trials with too few participants are common, and they are a real flag in our field. Such trials seem to provide us with some answers, but these answers lack validity. Next, control group. Good studies use active comparison groups, not wait lists. Never compare something to nothing. It usually proves that something is better than nothing, but it's not a comparison. Just ignore studies that compare those who receive the treatment to those who have been placed on a wait list. Why? Imagine that you have a health problem and suddenly get an invitation to a study on a new promising treatment or a new medicine. You enthusiastically say yes, but a couple of days later you learn that you have been not chosen for the treatment for now. You land on a waiting list. How would you feel? After being assigned to a waiting list, many people feel worse than they did even before being invited to the study. Depressed people are pessimists. They believe in bad luck. And voila, here is the confirmation. They didn't get through. This is how inactive comparison groups are built. Another problem with a waitlist is that it just demobilizes people from trying to find alternative solutions to their problems. When you are refused treatment, you have to deal with problems on your own. It might be divorcing when you are married or dating if you are single. It may be changes in your lifestyle or quitting a frustrating job. It might be anything. But any initiative is better than passivity. So when people are placed on the waitlist, they tend to wait. They were promised a solution in the future, and it weakens their motivation to find a solution here and now, on their own. It reinforces passivity. So waiting for psychotherapy may actually make them deteriorate. So when people in the active arm of the study make it better than the waiting list, it does not necessarily mean that the treatment worked. It may mean that it was the waiting list that worked, just in the negative direction. Is it a non-inferiority or superiority design? Non-inferiority trials investigate whether the treatment is not worse than competitors. But not being worse is not the same as being better. I work in a big hospital, and in order to implement a new treatment, we need something more than just the conclusion that it's not worse than what we already have. It has to be superior in some aspects. If not the outcome, then at least in cost efficiency or in lower dropout rate. So always check for superiority. Human beings are a social species, and any positive attention and social interaction makes us feel better. So does any contact with a therapist, especially when we lack other positive relationships in our lives. We can easily expect that study participants will report improvement right after the treatment, especially when the treatment was delivered in a group format, and many trials use that format. Belonging to a group is our basic social need, and thus it's a strong reinforcer. But the reported improvement may have nothing to do with the treatment. It may be a natural side effect of a meaningful and positive social interaction. Therefore, the more time passes after the treatment, the stronger credibility of the results. As a golden rule, don't trust results obtained in less than 6 months after the completion of therapy. The third kind of evidence, after theory and outcomes, is evidence of the implementation and delivery standards. Psychotherapy is not like pharmacotherapy. Here lies the biggest difference between the two. Psychotherapy can't be manufactured under strictly controlled conditions in one factory or at one university, and then physically distributed by anyone who can sell it. The quality of therapy always depends on who delivers it. In other words, psychotherapy is always remade during each therapy session. So we can, of course, be guided by whatever the treatment is considered as an evidence-based or not. But we must always be sure that what is being delivered to the client is actually the particular treatment, not only by name, but also by the content and the quality. That's why we need supervision and certifications of therapists. Unfortunately, ACT does not meet this last criterion of evidence-based treatments. It does not have any formal approved trainings, curriculum or standards, and there is no certification of ACT therapists. The only certification process is peer reviewing of ACT trainers, and I'm one of those guys. But we represent various fields of expertise. Some of us work clinically, while others work with organizations or in educational settings. We can train and supervise, but we can't certify ACT therapists. I think that this is the biggest obstacle in implementation and disseminations of ACT, especially in healthcare systems with high patient security. And I think that this is the reason why EMDR or mentalization-based therapy, for instance, are present in all Norwegian clinics, while ACT is almost absent. They don't have, the EMDR or other therapies, they don't have a better support in evidence. Actually, they have worse than ACT, but they have better training and implementation system. And of course, good marketing. That's all for today. If you have any questions you want me to address in my future videos, just mail them to me at my email. You can also post your questions to our Facebook group for mental health professionals. And if you're interested in my upcoming trainings, visit my website. See you!